Hello. So excited for this. Oh my gosh.
So excited.
I wish we could do this in person, but because I feel like that would just be a hot mess and really fun. But
we would get nothing done.
Right. I know. We would be like, wait, what's this podcast topic? So if you guys have been following me for a long time, you know Jenna. She's been around. She's been around the team
for a while.
For a hot minute. And she's, obviously incredible. And I wanted to talk about this because a lot of people, I think some people know, but maybe not everybody knows that you are a behavior analyst. And I think that obviously it's super rad. I know what you do. And so let's just go through a little bit of background on you, what you do. And then obviously this is super pertinent to everybody listening, regardless of if you are interested. This isn't just about nutrition and training and all of that, but clearly we're going to focus our efforts here. But this would apply to all the basics of behavior change. Any behavior that you're trying to change, this podcast will cover it. So background on you.
Yeah. So
this with my hands. Okay.
I'm a big hand talker too. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of hands in this podcast. Best of luck all around. So yeah, a little background on me. I actually recently got married. So my last name is no longer Potter. So I'm so sorry to Hogwarts, but I'm no longer a Potter. I'm Jenna Martin now.
I am the worst. Okay.
It's okay. It's okay. Maybe a lot of people know that, maybe they don't, but yeah, I recently just got married. So my name is officially different. I actually had to go to the Social Security office to do that. So it was official. But I am a behavior analyst. A lot of people think that when I say that, they're like, oh my gosh, like Criminal Minds. And I'm like, no.
Analyze me, please.
Yeah. Or they, it's just, there's a big misunderstanding basically. Or they might say something like, oh my gosh, are you analyzing me right now? And I'm like, no, maybe, but I'm not going to tell you that because that's weird. But yeah, so I work with kids with autism. That is as a behavior analyst, that's kind of the main population that we work with. There are some other avenues, but for the most part, we work with a lot of individuals with autism. Mainly my wheelhouse is kind of children ages 2 to 5, 2 to 6. But I have had the opportunity to work with teenagers, young adults, older individuals. So there's a lot of different populations that we can work with. But yeah, on a daily basis, I see about 3 to 4 clients every day. That's on Zoom right now. Previously, when I was working in a center, we had a center full of 15 kids. So of course I was seeing those 15 kids almost on a daily basis, but I spend my time in one-on-one with my kiddos in supervision, probably about 3 or 4 per day.
Nice. And then you see them some in person, right?
Yeah. So right now my job, I work 3 weeks out of the month from home. So I see my kids via telehealth. And then I travel to Georgia to see them in person, as well as the behavior technicians that are actually the ones providing the treatment that I've written. So they have the hard job. I have the really easy job.
I feel like in person would probably be, I'm sure you enjoy that so much more, obviously.
Yeah. And it was kind of a learning curve at first to try to figure out the best way to provide the best supervision for my clients and my RBTs to make sure that I was still providing quality treatment through telehealth. But when I got into it, I realized it really is not that different from me sitting right next to them. But yeah, being in person is so much more fun because I get to actually interact and have fun with them instead of just being here on the screen.
Yeah, you're like, hey, it's me.
Like, hi. And sometimes they're like, I really don't care. Like, I'm trying to do something else right now. So
there's this chick on the screen.
Yeah, why is she yelling at me?
Oh, but yeah,
just kidding,
so you are, Jenna's like, oh shit, shouldn't have said that. Hope my company's not listening. No, just kidding.
Yeah, I definitely don't yell at anyone.
No, I don't think I've ever heard you yell, like, ever, in all the years I've known you.
Well,
Like,
I mean,
really though.
there's probably situations that I yell in, but definitely not at work.
No, definitely not. But so let's go through the basics of behavior change and like what just kind of is behavior analysis, what is behavior change, and just let's start from there. Like that's a really general term, obviously, but we always hear about that. You know, like I want to change my behaviors, but like what does it actually mean? What's involved?
Yeah. So when you're looking at a behavior, we try to look at it from like a three-term contingency standpoint. So like what we would call it is antecedent, the behavior, the consequence. So the antecedent being whatever happens right before that behavior, then the behavior happens, and then what is the consequence? So a lot of people have a negative connotation around consequence, but the consequence is literally just whatever happens right after.
The outcome.
And then the consequence is either going to reinforce, so increase the future likelihood of that behavior, or it's going to punish it, which we're not hitting people. We're not, it's not that type of punishment, but it's just a term to either decrease the future likelihood of that behavior. So that's really kind of what goes into it. And you know, depending on what type of behavior you want to change, what you would like to do with it. Would you like to decrease it? Would you like to increase it? Would you like to, you know, make it happen more intensely? You know, like it just depends on how you want to change it, is how we can kind of mix those variables up and change the behavior.
Yeah, I feel like the antecedent would be really important, right? Because I feel like that's where when I talk to clients who are struggling with a certain behavior, and that's like the behavior has become a pattern, right? Whether it's like a recent pattern or it's been something that, oh, I've done this for the past 5 years, that like split second before, like that whole environment right before is so important. And sometimes it takes a while, especially with like a coaching situation, as you know, like to figure out really like what is happening beforehand, especially because of, you know, what I'm doing. It's like online and it's people reporting to me. So I'm trying to like piece together with all of their information. Okay. Like I am starting to see this pattern emerge, but every time before you do X, like this happens. And that is really what can like make it either like happen or not. Like, and that is such a key part to target, I feel like, for a lot of the behaviors, especially like with what we do with like nutrition and all that, because that is like, oh, I'm if the antecedent is like just an emotionally draining like day, whether it's like a person or a work situation or any type of interpersonal conflict, well, that is now going to set off a overeating behavior. Like that's the piece that we need to figure out, not just like, oh, I don't know why I've overeaten now several times in the past month. Okay, well, every time this is the exact trend that happens. So like that little right before part is so critical.
Yeah. And there's you know, if we were living in a vacuum and there were no other things around us, you know, there wouldn't be all of these naturally occurring competing contingencies happening day in and day out. There's so many things, so many contingencies that we're exposed to on a daily basis that make the behavior that we're trying to increase or decrease incredibly hard. And so that's where kind of people get stuck, is where they're like, well, I can't control these things. So like, what am I supposed to do? And like, you're never going to be able to control everything. You can't do that unless we live in a vacuum. That's, you know, that, and that's not life. Here to tell you, you know, you're never going to be able to control everything. It's really trying to see like, okay, this behavior, like what is the smallest change that we can make in order to get some sort of benefit or more move towards where we would like to go without making it so drastic that you can't maintain this.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, is when in the like nutrition and fitness space, when we talk about behavior change, everybody wants to completely override everything that they've ever done in like, you know, a few weeks, or they just have this like irrational belief that like, oh, when I start this plan, it's all going to change. Or like when I sign up for coaching, like all my behaviors are going to change. Like when I get on this program, like everything's going to be different. And certainly there's going to be like that initial like zest and excitement for like what you're doing. But that's going to like wane really quickly, and you're going to be smacked in the face with life. Like you said, if we were in a vacuum, yeah, it's really easy to be like, okay, here's my meal. Like on paper, this is all really easy. Yeah. But it's only easy until those behaviors are created. Then like the stuff that we do on a day-to-day basis that seems easy, those are all behaviors that we created. So that's why it's easy. It's not because it like we're trying, it's just because like, oh, this is actually like my reality now. But when you're first starting, you can't be like, okay, I'm going to change my food and my training and my cardio and hit a step goal and then go outside and then make sure I sleep right and then take all these supplements and do like, whoa. And make sure that I'm like not stressed. You're like, okay, that's like 15 fucking things that you wanted to do a week. So probably not going to change any of these.
Not stressed on top of adding a bunch of other things is super stressful. Like, exactly. And then on top of like having a family or having a job, God forbid, you know, like
yeah, exactly. You know, like
there's making an income, you know,
other things that are happening.
Things are tough. Yes.
So yeah, talk about, you mentioned the reinforcement and punishment, and like, let's just like kind of go through that, because I think you're right. Like a lot of people hear the word like consequence or punishment and they only think that it's like these bad terms, but it's like, obviously consequence is also just kind of like the outcome. It's an easier way to think of it, but like punishment still can be like, in this context, it's not necessarily like just negative.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, to make it even more confusing, I am going to use the word negative in this little explanation, but it's going to have a meaning. maybe negative is the word that it's not actually going to be negative. It's going to be a different meaning, but so
words are hard.
Yes. But also, I mean, you wouldn't have done, like, you didn't know I was going to talk about negative and negative reinforcement and negative punishment. Like you didn't know that. So it's okay. So reinforcement, like I said, it's anything that happens after a behavior that's going to increase the future likelihood. So obviously, you know, if we have a behavior, we want to see more of it. We want to provide immediate reinforcement. And there's so much that goes into reinforcement that people don't realize. And we can go deeper into reinforcement if after this little explanation of both, if you want. So a lot goes into it. There's a lot of different types of things that can affect reinforcement, that can actually make things not reinforcing. When people think like, oh, I gave someone a reward, so, you know, that obviously has to increase that behavior. Not necessarily. So negative reinforcement would be anything that would be not necessarily provided, but something that is taken away, but it still increases the future likelihood of that behavior. So like, say I am sitting in a loud room and I just can't take it anymore. I move out of the loud room and, you know, I feel better once I get into the other room and it's quiet. That would be an example of reinforcing. Moving out of a loud room would be negative reinforcement of that behavior. So you're removing yourself from that situation, or you're removing the loudness, and, you know, so you're increasing that behavior of leaving the room. Positive reinforcement would be something that everybody thinks of. So I went to the gym today, so I'm going to get a cookie, you know, like, and not necessarily the best example of like what you should and shouldn't do. Maybe you should, I don't know. Could be your free meal day, whatever, you do you. But that's what everybody thinks of as reinforcement, is the positive kind, something that is added or given, and then it increases the future likelihood.
So negative is more like taking away something and then adding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and then punishment is anything, any sort of stimulus that is that decreases the future likelihood of a behavior occurring. So say you are talking to a friend and they're like, shut up. You know, they just yell at you and you stop talking and you're like, okay, well, think I really want to talk to that person anymore. So, you know, maybe now, like the next time you see that person, you don't want to talk to them. That would be an example of positive punishment. You know, talking to that person decreases because that person yelled at you. So negative punishment is, this is kind of what we like to say to avoid in the field, just because it can really become pretty aversive. So like response cost, things like that. It's not necessarily the route you want to go. So punishment in general is not necessarily our first go-to when it comes to treatment. We're always going to be reinforcement based. Now, not necessarily never punishment, but we always focus on reinforcement first. So negative punishment would be like your kid is playing with something too loudly and you snatch it away from them. And then, so, you know, they're not going to want to play with that toy or play with it in your presence because, you know, you just snatched it away from them instead of like asking them to like move away or, you know, whatever. There's lots of avenues of different behaviors that you could use, but, you know, taking away something punishes the future likelihood of that behavior.
Okay, that makes sense. It's funny, I'm just thinking of this one example, which is like totally not related, but remember when me and O went and saw those sloths and like okay, so me and Olivia drove like 2 hours one time to go like meet a sloth because we are insane. And we found this thing where, you know, you could like actually meet them and hang out with them. So the only adults, obviously, well, there was adults, but they were all with their kids. And so we drive like middle of like bumfuck nowhere, Florida, right? Like I'm talking like heavy BFE. We get there and I'm like, oh God, like what did we sign up for? And, you know, so we go to the little counter and we're all excited. And then they're like, oh, he's really sleepy. Like he's not getting out. And I'm like, hey, I paid this much money to be here. I drove all this way. You're getting the sloth out of his little bucket and we're going to see him. She's like, we don't use negative, like punishment here or whatever. Like she said something and I was like, can you just like pick, like, I don't handle sloths. I don't know. I was like, can you just like, you know, get him, help get him out? She's like, we don't do that here. And I was like, okay, well, I would like to see a sloth. And like they literally were like had to call. They're like, Gary is not, whatever the fuck is, Gary's not getting out of the pot. We need to have a plan B. Like we had to go see the other sloth who's more social. I was like, obviously this would happen to us. She like looked at me like I like was committing like the crime of the century. Like I couldn't get him out of this pot. Like I was like, and then all the parents are like looking at me. I'm like, okay, this is so embarrassing. Like this whole situation. Anyways, we saw the other sloth.
Yeah, I mean, from her standpoint, like I totally get it, but also I totally get it. Like I get it as well. Like I really want to see this damn sloth. Like, come on.
But I was just like, I don't know. Can you like I don't know. Do you guys handle them? Like most people handle animals, you know what I mean, at a zoo. So I was like, can you pick him up? And they were like, I was like, okay, it's my bad.
I was just kidding. I definitely, of course you can't pick him up.
Anyway, so I guess that was just a hilarious like just behavioral thing that as you were talking about that, I'm like, I have to add this anecdote.
Well, that particular sloth's response may decrease your future likelihood of driving 2 hours to go and
most likely because it was
sloths. I mean, you know,
it was,
even though I'm pretty sure that if you had the opportunity, you'd probably do it again, right? Like,
I mean, it was fun. It was fun. They didn't have any three-toed though, because I don't think you can have those in captivity, which is like really who I'd like to see. But like, I don't
what?
Like the creepy one.
Oh,
like,
three-toed sloth. Got
like
it.
the three,
Yeah, the super
come on,
cool
Jenna.
one.
The super cool, creepy ones. And I feel like I never see them in captivity here. I only see them like in natural stuff or like in sanctuaries, like in Costa Rica. So like, I just don't know if they like can't bring them here or like what.
In our
But
calendar that we got.
oh my God. Yeah. We sound like we have a problem. All right. We need it's like we have an issue with sloths.
Yeah, we have a sloth calendar, whatever.
The original sloth calendar.
The original. There are no
it literally says that on there, you guys, like in case there was anybody who had like, like tried to like scam them, rip them off. Okay. Anyways, make sure you get the original sloth calendar. So that's reinforcement, reinforcement and punishment. So what are some functions of behavior? Like just on like a general sense.
Yeah. So the functions of behavior basically go like it can be for attention, it can be to escape a situation, it can be automatically reinforced, it can be, which kind of goes in line with being sensory, or it can be for like something tangible. And so you have to do, this is kind of where my job comes in as far as like behavior reduction, is figuring out, okay, what's the function of this behavior and how can we either decrease it or increase it? You know, not all behaviors are necessarily bad. But you know, that's where we kind of look at the 3-term contingencies, like, all right, what's the antecedent? What's the behavior? What was that consequence? And then kind of seeing like over time, you know, what were the most common consequences in antecedents, and that's how we can figure out what the function of a behavior might be.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And that's how you would like create then the plan to change from there, right? Like,
yes, yeah.
How long do you typically? Because obviously it can take time to see all those things, like what is happening before and afterwards. How long do you typically say, okay, like let's see how long this behavior goes? I mean, of course, I know it's going to depend on the behavior, but like depending on how like severe or not severe it is, but like how long would you say is a good time before you adjust something, essentially, like observe and then we have to make a change? Like what's like a time course for that, for like behavior change?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very case dependent. So if I had, you know, a client with a very severe behavior that was dangerous, I'm not going to spend a lot of time testing things. Because the more that I test things, the more they're probably injuring themselves or injuring other people. So, you know, it's not even really ethical to like go through a testing with a super, you know, severe behavior. You would need to like maybe test like precursor behavior or something like that. But for, you know, the population that we're probably speaking about, I would say, you know, like over a week time span, I think that I could get like a pretty good idea of like, all right, this is the function of this person's behavior. Now with a trained eye, and actually like if I were to watch this person 24 hours a day, like I would be able to tell you like at the end of the day, you know, no problem. But, you know, someone who is just living their life and you have like a coach client relationship, you know, maybe at the end of the week in the check-in, they could give you some data on like, all right, this is what happened. This is how I responded. And this is what, you know, the consequence was. And then you could be like, all right, well, the function of this behavior, or, you know, what you're really trying to get is, I would say most of your clients are probably engaging in a lot of escape maintain behavior. So like escaping from the gym or escaping from following their macro, you know, whatever.
Or escaping from other things, like stuff that they don't want to deal with, and using those things as a way. I feel like that's probably even the most common. Like, I don't want to deal with this in my life, so I'm going to turn to food or exercise or some type of like over or under, you know, compensatory behaviors because of that.
Yeah. And I mean, in that type of situation, you know, escaping from like the antecedent, you know, it's really hard to kind of say like, well, you can't do that. you know, like you can't escape from that. Like, and of course they know that, like people know, like, I can't just run away from this, but that doesn't stop anybody from doing it. You know, I know I try to escape from several things every single day, but that doesn't mean that I should do it. You know, so yeah, it just, it gets very complex as far as and it kind of goes back to the naturally occurring competing contingencies that we're exposed to every single day. With all of those happening, just all of that gets so complex, and how to teach somebody how to not engage in this behavior just because, you know, temporarily it kind of solves the problem is really hard.
Yeah. And that would be where you would probably say, hey, like if there's something that's presenting that seems to be like the root issue that's like happening over and over again, like tackling just that one thing instead of how we said before, like you want to try to, everybody wants to do a million things at once, but it's like, if you like, it's really hard to make a change. Like it's really hard to make a behavior change in general on top of everything else that's going on, like in life that is constantly changing, that like you can't control. So that would be why it's like, all right, we need to just focus on this one thing until we really, really get this down. And that doesn't mean you're always going to have it down forever, but you know, it's not going, you can't expect to identify 4 behaviors that are like maybe not the best and then like fix all of them.
Yeah.
You have to say, okay, I'm going to break down this one. And where does like self-sabotage fit into this? And I know there's obviously very competing, like some people talk about this as like a very real thing. Other people say, no. Self-sabotage is basically you just like, that's actually because you don't want to do that. You think you want to do it, but you're expressing it a different way. And so do you know what I'm talking, like there's like these 2 camps in like the self-sabotage kind of world. So where do you think that fits in? And I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think there's probably both, right? Like it makes sense. Yeah. Both of them make sense to me. Like,
yeah. And so, you know, I probably fit more into the second camp that you were talking about, mainly because from the perspective of a behavior analyst, it's not that we don't think emotions and thoughts exist. Of course they do. They're just private events, and we only look at behaviors. So like things that we can see and measure. And, you know, we talk about the dead man test. So if a dead man couldn't do it, or if he can do it, it's not a behavior. You know, like if a dead person can do that, like that's not a behavior. So, but of course we understand like private events do happen. So thoughts, emotions, things like that, they do happen. We can talk about being like labeling that emotion or that thought, that feeling when it comes up. So like tacting is what we would call that. So we would call that tacting a certain thought or feeling or emotion, and then how we respond to that. So the behavior that immediately follows that is, you know, kind of what you were saying, like, oh, you know, we don't say that self-sabotage doesn't, you know, exist. It's these feelings and you're trying to run away from them. But I think that labeling those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions that come up is extremely important. Realizing, okay, this is how I feel. This is how I should respond. Instead of like, I don't know what that is. Don't want to know. Don't care. I'm just going to do whatever. And that becomes a behavior chain to where, all right, this is how I feel. This is how I deal with it by maybe binge eating, drinking, you know, whatever. Any sort of behavior that maybe might be detrimental for that person.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because on one hand, I understand that, right? Okay, so you say you have an expressed goal of this, but every time you're challenged with it, you're actively working against that goal. So maybe that really isn't your goal, right? Because your behaviors are showing that. But also on the other side of it, maybe like all of your past experiences and like potentially trauma and like whatever it might be is influencing that behavior, right? So I think that there is probably like some obviously middle ground there with like both of it, but it's not enough to say like, oh, because of my past, I'm self-sabotaging again. Here I am. Like this keeps happening over and over again. That part of it is recognizing, okay, maybe this, like, where did things go wrong? Like what created this? But also we're right here. I continue to do this behavior. This is a detrimental behavior to me. What can I do to solve this or create a different behavior or move away from it? So I think that we have to like recognize the past and like the role of all of that as to why you might be self-sabotaging. But in the exact here and now, there has to be a plan and there has to be things that we can look at immediately. And I think that actually makes it feel almost better, right? Because it's like, okay, I think that sometimes when we talk about stuff like, you know, trauma and whatever, and a lot of times people can feel really like powerless, like, oh God, I had all this bad stuff happen to me, or all this bad stuff is currently happening to me. Like I feel really out of control. Whereas if you look at it from more of a behavior perspective, you're like, yes, all this either happened or is happening, but what can I do? I can take control over my current behaviors, like what I'm doing, you know, before this, what I'm avoiding. And I think that that's a more like empowering role to take instead of always just like, I don't want to say dwelling on the past because it's like not a good way of putting it, but like always going back to that instead of saying, what can I do right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it kind of goes back to like kind of that victim mentality. You know, that's obviously not where we're taking this podcast, but
woo, that's a drinking podcast, but
that kind of repetitive,
like 2:45.
All of these things have happened to me, you know, and there's nothing that I can do about it, instead of being like, this is some bad shit that happened. And this is how I've dealt with it in the past. It's not serving me. So like, what can I do to be like, all right, this is what happened to me. Like, how can I change the behaviors that are following those, you know, thoughts, feelings, emotions that I'm avoiding dealing with. And obviously if that was the case, like we would probably refer to somebody like Rick. And he could, you know, he would be better suited to help that person deal with that type of thing. So
I think, that's obviously what the role of a therapist generally is. Where obviously you're dealing with the exact, okay, here's a behavior. This is detrimental, or we want more of this positive, less of this detrimental behavior, whatever it might be, or both. Let's adjust this. And I think that, you have to be able to reflect on past experiences and learn from them and not just avoid them, right? Because if all you do is just bury negative past events, that is going to like come back at some point and like blow up, right? Like, trust me, I am the best at packing things away and then just push it down. And then it just like,
everything's fine. Yeah, I'm fine. Everything's great.
It's literally when I was just with my mom and we're recording this like right after we got back from this trip, and we were skiing in Colorado and we were at a restaurant and we were just talking about some stuff, and it was, you know, just kind of some emotional stuff, and, you know, we were just kind of getting into it and whatever. And then all of a sudden, like, we're just kind of like looking around. We were talking so much that we had lit the napkin on fire. There's like the only night we're like at like a fancy steakhouse. Legit, the napkin was on fire, and I'm like, this is the literal like, this is fine meme. We're both like, oh shit, we're like trying to like fan it out, and it's like completely like just ruined. And we were like, hey, another like napkin. I was like, this is fine. Like, that's literally what it felt like. It was hilarious. But yeah, don't be the this is fine meme, right? Because obviously we always joke about that, but like part of it is like, you can't just run from, you know, either your past or current situation. So that is important to recognize. But if you're only caught up with that and you're not caught up with any solutions, you're literally going to feel like you're spinning your wheels and nothing productive is going to come from that.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely think that it's important to note that, like, you know, say the first time that it happens and you confront those feelings and you know, make a better choice on your next behavior, that's not necessarily going to mean you're changed forever. No. It takes several learning opportunities to create, you know, what we would call a habit or, you know, a learned behavior.
What would be like a chain? I know it's hard to say because there's no real timeline, but like, let's say someone has been dealing with like an issue with food, right? Like, okay, they've been dealing off and on with, you know, I don't even want to call it categorized as, you know, binge eating disorder, but like off and on overeating episodes, a few binges here and there. And they've been dealing with that off and on for like years. Like, what is a real trajectory? And obviously I know you have experience with that if you want to share any of that, but like, what is an actual trajectory of like working through that as like a behavior? Like,
yeah. So, I mean, speaking from personal experience, I mean, I had to kind of look within and figure out, you know, why, like, what is it that what is causing this behavior of like wanting to binge or just like say, fuck it, you know, and like, and just eat whatever. And, you know, it took looking at that and being like, okay, these are the situations that cause me to, you know, want to do those things. And so maybe it took like not engaging in certain activities, for a period of time until I could, you know, associate those activities with something completely different. So, you know, associating in a certain activity might be like that. It may have been aversive at one point in your life. And so every time that you are in this situation, it brings up very negative emotions and you're just, you know, and then boom, you're next thing you know, you're in your pantry and just like eating whatever. So, you know, taking yourself out of those situations or realizing like, okay, being in this situation or being with this person or even watching this, you know, makes me feel this way. And so it's like, okay, I'm not going to do this. So you just kind of remove yourself from that situation for a while. And then it's at some point you have to give yourself practice at dealing with that. So maybe, you know, you've had some time away from it, you don't do it. So now you're going to put yourself back in that situation and you're going to deal with it head on. And you have these, you know, whatever it is, this plan. And you're like, okay, I'm going to follow this plan. You know, I'm not going to, you know, necessarily engage in the behavior that I don't want to when this is over or during it or whatever. So you practice it, you engage in the behavior that you're trying to engage in. And then obviously the reinforcement piece comes in. And so for me, reinforcement was like just the internal, like, I did it. Like, I did that. Like, I didn't, you know, freak out. I didn't have this horrible reaction. I didn't, you know, turn to food. I didn't do it. So it was like this internal, like, satisfaction of like, okay, I can do that. And that was enough reinforcement for me to keep putting myself in those situations until it just became a habit.
Yeah, I think
and not everybody is going to be that way, but for me personally, that's, yeah.
And I think that's a big difference. There's a big distinction there of avoiding those people, situations, triggers, whatever you want to call it. I'm not really sure if there's like a right word, but you're avoiding those situations. And that's very different though than like avoidance behaviors, right? Because like you're saying, okay, there's a really negative behavior for me that like I'm overeating or I'm binging. I know that every time that I'm around this group of people or every time that I am, you know, I'm on social media for too long or whatever, or have a really stressful day, whatever it is. You know, if it's very like specific, okay, I'm going to remove myself. Obviously, if you're like, oh, my work makes me binge. Okay, well, that's a little too broad and that's not, and that's also probably too broad. Like you're not really probably thinking deep, like there's more of a reason. Like it might be work, but like, what is the real reason here, right? So if you can remove yourself from something, I do feel like that's different than just avoiding it because you're confronting it. You're just removing that for a period of time. And then, like you said, you have to add it back in. And this is like the hardest part when we're trying to work on clients with like untracked meals and all of that, right? And I always try to say like, it's like, it is trial by fire because you're not going to nail it right away. You're not. Some people do, but most people don't, you know what I mean? And that's okay. I don't expect anybody to like nail that perfectly, especially if they have had, you know, kind of a rough relationship with food, which, let's be honest, is most people, right? So it's going to be really hard to just like nail that right out of the gate. But I'm also not going to know where you're going to struggle until you actually struggle, because like what I struggle with is different than what you would struggle with. That is different than what someone over here would struggle with. So sometimes you have to be like, all right, we've gotten to a place where like things are pretty status quo. Let's try this. Let's add it back in. And only till afterwards can we reassess like what happened. Is that like a good approach?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, until you have like the full contingency like laid out in front of you, you know, it's really, you know, hard to know like what's, you know, what actually occurred. And I think, you know, kind of going back to like the reinforcement thing, I think, you know, a lot of people think that they are setting themselves up for success, like, oh yeah, I'm going to reinforce my behavior, but like whatever they're choosing as a reinforcer is not actually reinforcing for them. You know, like it might be, you know, I go get my nails done if I, you know, whatever, do this for the whole week. Like that could be something that might be, but like maybe you don't really care for that, like, or maybe it's just that's not reinforcing enough. Like maybe you need to find something else that's like more reinforcing. And I think the accountability thing with a coach, like kind of the accountability and that feedback coming from a coach can also serve as reinforcement. And so like that's kind of why people seek out a coach, like, okay, I need this accountability. And that feedback, like of either like, hey, this is great, keep doing this, or like, hey, let's make these changes. And like kind of that, like, okay, like this is accepting, like my coach is here to help me. Kind of that relationship is kind of what becomes like somewhat of a reinforcer for people. So, you know, at some point you have to evaluate like what the reinforcer is and if it's actually reinforcing, because if it's not, you're not going to change behavior.
Yeah. And I think that's also going to take trial and error. And, you know, like you said, having that accountability, like one of the biggest things with coaching is obviously there's going to be a certain point where people need more like education and knowledge to get to that, to get them to a particular place, regardless of that goal. But then at some point it does transition where the client has developed a lot of skills. And then it's about like, okay, let's switch our focus a little bit. Let's work on these other things. But also it is that accountability piece to be like, all right, I know, like I have to check in with this person. Like I'm going to ask them questions. I'm going to like do this and that, and that's going to kind of guide my behaviors for the week. And I don't really think there's anything wrong with that. Like, I think some people might say like, oh, you should be able to do it on your own. It's like, well, maybe, but also like, maybe some people need more reinforcement than others. That's different. You know, like some people might need like a physical reinforcer as far as like, hey, when you get my nails done. Some people might need like words from someone else, or that just like detached view where they're like, listen, like I have so much else going on. Like I can't even really think about this. Like I just want somebody else to be able to kind of do this for me. Or maybe you can just self-reflect and that's enough for you. Like that could be it. So I think identifying, you know, really identifying first and foremost, like if you are struggling with certain behaviors, like you really have to be honest with, you know, what those behaviors are and how you're currently coping with them. You know, not like there's no reason to like sugarcoat this or lie about this to yourself. Like, hey, what am I doing? And I think that self-awareness is the first part, because I think a lot of us go through life, at least, you know, I mean, I have like just kind of like doing stuff. And then you're like, all right, yeah, this is probably like a little maladaptive, but like whatever. And then like all of a sudden, like something happens to where it like blows up and you're like, this was really maladaptive. Yeah. And I handled this earlier, but I didn't. And then I think that sometimes those periods, even though it can feel really, really overwhelming, like, all right, this is like all good information. Like I needed to learn this and know this. So yeah, identifying what it is, and then, you know, creating this plan, really being able to see what is happening before, what is happening after. And then that kind of ties in, like, I want us to talk a little bit about motivation, because like, how does that work? How does that wane? Because I feel like so many people, instead of relying on like habits and behaviors, or instead of relying on habits and creating behaviors that can become habits, they try to rely on motivation. And we always hear this. Everybody knows, no, don't rely on motivation, rely on discipline. And like, everybody knows it. Like everybody knows that, but not a lot of people are actually doing that. And they're still, regardless of they have the best intentions, but they're still relying on motivation. And at some point, it's not going to be there. You know, it sounds really appealing to like plan all your food and prep everything perfectly. But what happens when you have a work trip come up, or your partner wants to go to dinner, or you're like, your son or daughter has like a birthday party? Like, you're not going to do that. So
yeah,
like life is going to happen. So, you know, like, and then what's going to happen, obviously, if you don't have like a flexible mindset with everything, is that that's just going to completely go to shit. So it's easy to be motivated when life is easy, but life is not always easy. So how do we like navigate all that?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to like kind of break down motivation, you know, when we look at motivation, like as far as a behavior analyst, we're going to look at like satiation. That's a very hard word. Satiation and deprivation. So say you haven't had ice cream in a while, and you pass Dairy Queen and you're like, man, ice cream sounds really good. You're going to be more likely to go to Dairy Queen because you haven't had it so long and it sounds good. Or if you just had ice cream yesterday, you might just be like, unless you're me, because ice cream sounds great every day.
I was like, damn, that sounds good.
I don't ever get satiated on ice cream. Name some other food groups. Maybe I might get satiated, but so maybe you just had ice cream yesterday and you're like, and you pass Dairy Queen, you don't even notice it because you're like, I just had it, you know, whatever. So as far as, you know, the motivational operation on things, you know, as far as motivation for like what your clients would, you know, kind of go through, I would say that what kind of really derails people is that reinforcement is too far away. And like, if you're not seeing, like nothing's changing, like you're doing all these things and then like, it's just, you know, you feel like you're not getting anywhere, people really start to just be like, well, what am I doing this for? And it's like, okay, well, you haven't set up any type of reinforcement for yourself along the way. Like, you know, and so, you know, say you're training for a bodybuilding show, the biggest reinforcer is getting up on stage, and obviously, hopefully you win. If you don't, whatever, you still look great and you get to wear a cute suit and like whatever. So, so glamorous. But, you know, obviously you look great. So like you feel great. And then, you know, so that's like the biggest reinforcer. But along the way, you know, unless you have really just set yourself up with habits and being determined and knowing that like, you know, I'm not going to reach my goal unless I just put in the work, you know, you're never going to get to that main reinforcer. And so for new people, I think it's so like, I can see where they're just like, they just get discouraged and they're like, you know, whatever, you know, it was my son's birthday this weekend and we went out to dinner and now the scale's up and I'm tired and I don't want to go to the gym. So I'm just not going to go. And it's like, you know, those natural contingencies that we can't control, life's going to happen. And, you know, that's kind of how it's that reinforcement that's just too delayed for people, that they're just like, it's so far away. Like, I'm not motivated for this anymore.
So what would be like a small reinforcer to possibly, like, obviously I know the timelines can be different for everybody because not everybody needs a reinforcer, but that's a really great point. For most people, regardless if they're physique athlete, performance athlete, lifestyle client, doesn't really matter. It's probably going to be too far because that goal is probably going to be pretty looming, as it should, like the big goal, right? Mm-hmm. But like kind of frequency, like what, and I know everybody's reinforcement is going to be different, but like every few weeks. Like,
yeah. So, I mean, we would call this like a schedule of reinforcement. Okay. And so we would, like, what I would say is for some, like if it was a newer person to maybe behavior change, I would start them out on a pretty thick schedule of reinforcement. Like it could be even up to daily. And whether it's, you know, I hate to even use this like, example, because so many people are like, what are those things? Diet bets, like where they, I don't know. I've seen it like on Instagram where people are like betting. So like they bet on
hopefully
like,
nobody's a gambling addict.
anyways, I don't even know how the whole
what
thing
is a
works.
diet bet? Like, oh, you win if you
lost. So like whoever loses the most money or loses the most weight, gets the money. Like, I don't know. It's kind of like one of those things, which, if that's motivating for somebody, absolutely go do it. Like I'm, no reinforcers off the table as long as you're not hurting yourself or others. So like, anyways, I don't even started talking about diabeting and I got really distracted. So thickening the schedule of reinforcement is what we were talking about. Like I could even say that like maybe daily, like every day, if you complete your, you hit your macros, you hit your steps, whatever the goal is, maybe not all of those things on one day, but like say, you get some type of reinforcement, whether it be you set aside $5 for something that you're really want to purchase, or, it can be so many things. And then maybe that person, they get used to doing that and you can thin the schedule of reinforcement. So they don't need reinforcement as often because they're still continuing those behaviors. And, I would say that for like a dedicated bodybuilder, like really the reinforcement for them is like checking the boxes every single day, or at least it was for me, like being like, dang, I did this, I did that, I did, wow. Like, and I hit, like I checked all the boxes today, I'm going to sleep and then we're going to wake up, we're going to do it tomorrow. So, I mean, but for people who are new, I think that they need a thicker schedule of reinforcement so that they can keep that motivation. Like, wow, I say like in the first week, like every day they put aside $5 for something. Like, wow, I put aside $5 every single day this week. Like I'm that much closer to like this goal of, and then it doesn't even become about that thing. It becomes like, several weeks down the road, they've accomplished and made all of these habits that they're like, oh, I just do this on a daily basis now. This is just my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's not necessarily that reinforcement is going to become like an everyday thing that they have to do. They'll kind of naturally drift away from that if they're already developing the behavior. And then look, you saved all this money for Nitro Brew and you can just like go blow it a few days or just send it to me because your girl could use some money for something. Just kidding, but like
right across the street, you can just go whenever you want.
It is such a problem. I went there today because I knew I had 18 calls to do and all this stuff. So I was like, okay, it's sad, but also like, it's not, right? Because it's kind of like, okay, I don't need this, but I enjoy it. And it's like, all right, I have a really busy day that I'm going to be having. And I know like, okay, for me, like I have this, and this is something that is like it signifies like I have a lot that I'm going to do. Like I don't just casually go get a Nitro, you know what I mean? Like I'm not just like, oh, it's a casual afternoon. Like no, I'm getting it because I'm like, this signifies like a busy work day and I would like it. And I mean, I guess maybe that's backwards because I get it first, but it's
it's a conditional discrimination for you. Like, people like, especially when people work in like work blocks, kind of like how you do, like they set up their environment in a certain way. And like this, signifies like this is when we work. And when things are different, like, they set up an environment when it's relaxing, I know that people respond to that really well. I do. I don't want a bunch of work stuff around when I'm trying to chill, so setting up an environment in a way that signifies like, all right, it's time to relax, or setting up a environment like, okay, it's time to work. And I think that can be really beneficial for people as well, who are trying to change behaviors. Like, obviously, or antecedent interventions like are key. Like, obviously, if you prep your food, or if you pack your gym bag the night before, like those are all antecedent interventions that are super easy to make sure that you have all of this and planned so that when you're hungry, you're not going to, grab, just whatever. You're like, oh, I already have this meal. Great. That's a super easy thing for people to do.
That makes sense. Cause I'm like thinking, okay, like these are like, I didn't know the words for this before, but like, okay, so say you have like a busy day, okay, planning out in your planner, like the night before, like, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this, like something about that, instead of just waking up and like, what am I going to do today? Like, like I got to get up, I got to go do this. Right. Or like, for a lot of people, if they are struggling with getting to the gym, I know this sounds so silly, but like, sometimes like, just like, what am I going to wear? What am I going to
exactly
plan that the night before, you know what I mean? And if you really want to, you can change your mind, but just having that out. I know for me, if I prep, like, okay, I have like my decaf, like ready to go in the morning, I have some food prepped. I like kind of know what I'm going to be doing, like around roughly for certain things at different times. And, maybe I have my clothes laid out. Like my day is so much easier. It's when I don't do that kind of stuff that like I'm running into these hurdles. And these are things that I'm still doing on a daily basis. I'm just doing them like a lot more chaotically and like less smoothly. Yeah. And it's not because I'm like a psycho planner. It's just like this took away like the hurdle of me not completing the behavior.
And because I mean, with that antecedent in place, the behavior that follows is going to be the desired behavior. If that antecedent isn't in place and it's a different antecedent, the behavior that follows might not be the desired behavior. Or, say you haven't planned your workout clothes in the morning, whatever, now you're running late. Now you can't get your whole workout in. It throws your day off. You're upset. And then you may engage in some sort of undesired behaviors later because you're frustrated or, whatever. So, I mean, as far as like biggest things, I mean, and you talk about this all the time, you just don't call them antecedent interventions, but that's one of the best things that people can do is set up their environment to be successful. Obviously if you are an alcoholic, no one's going to encourage you to keep alcohol in your house. Maybe at some point, because if you have, and you're, recovered and you're okay with it and whatever, but not immediately. No one's going to suggest that. So
probably not for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that person is trying to change a behavior and so are you. So, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes, I mean, that's a very extreme example, but it's still an example.
No, I mean, and that's something that people deal with every day. And a lot of people deal with overconsumption in a lot of capacities, right? Whether it's alcohol, food, behaviors, and obviously this is all related to dopamine and all that. We can go down a rabbit hole of that. But so one thing that I think, to summarize that with the antecedent behaviors, that probably makes sense if you're trying to add something, right? Like that probably is like if you're trying to like add a positive behavior, focusing on what to do beforehand is probably the most important. And then would you say, if you're trying to remove a negative behavior, is that still the most important thing, or is there something else?
I think so. I think that for the population that we're talking about, absolutely. I think that antecedents almost come out to be more important. Obviously, you still want to focus on reinforcement, but like I said, with the population that we're kind of looking at, there's not going to be a lot of, there's going to be some people that respond really well to tangible reinforcement. Like they want that thing that they can hold, that they purchased, that they saved for, whatever. Some people are going to really respond to that. And I think more people probably respond to like the satisfaction of like, holy shit, like I did this. Like, I'm so proud of myself. Or like, maybe you have like, hopefully you have support, like from your spouse, your family, your kids, whoever. And they're like, oh, I'm so proud of you. You're doing so great. Like obviously the approval from them, approval from others, unfortunately, it's a huge reinforcer. And I mean, obviously we've seen that with social media. That's been put under a magnifying glass. So
yeah, for better and for worse, like some people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's not something that we can really ignore. We have to accept that like social approval, like in our culture is a huge reinforcer. So, I mean, obviously, you know, going to the social media thing, when you post a picture on Instagram and you've, you know, say you've lost 15 pounds and you're like, well, look at me. I feel so good about myself. And obviously people are commenting like, oh my gosh, you look so great, blah, blah, blah. You know, that's reinforcing. I don't care who wants to sit here and say it's not. It is.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, it becomes a bad thing when you're only searching for that. So you're posting thirst traps and like whatever, just for comments, or whatever. So like, I mean, obviously that's not something we want to gravitate towards, but you know, the social approval of others is absolutely like a huge reinforcer for people.
Yeah. And I think, you know, a lot of people talk really negatively about comparison, and to some degree, certainly, right? I think a unrealistic comparison to things that are totally out of grasp is going to be detrimental. But I don't think that comparison by itself is necessarily a bad thing, right? Like it can be very motivating, you know, and the reason a lot of people strive to do things is because they see that others can do it. So I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that. If you're, you know, what would be wrong is if you're comparing yourself to, you know, some, like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but like just a totally different life. Like a lot of people look at competitors, right? And they look at the stage pictures, and you know how they're like, oh my God, like look at this and that what. First of all, let me tell you. First of all, that person. Now, a lot of those people look amazing in person. I'm not going to say that they don't, right? But they even look different in person. As amazing as they look in person, it's still just very different. Like the way that the photo is captured and the lighting. And I can tell you, some of the best pictures I've ever taken on stage, I look like fucking Walking Dead in person. You know what I'm talking about? Like I look, you know, also me, just because I have to get so but like, yeah, it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like I look good for 5 minutes on stage, but is the rest of me like, I got tie-ins when I'm wearing like a thong that's crystallized, but I can't sit down because my ass hurts because there's nothing there. Right? Like, so it's not that it's wrong. It's not better, worse. It's just the reality. Right. But people will see that, and they'll see someone who's like, oh my gosh, like all they do is work out and eat and sleep, and the top 0.001% of bodybuilders. How are you going to compare yourself to that person who just started weightlifting 3 years ago, has a full-time job, has a family, has a 20-year diet history? This is completely an irrelevant comparison. You can appreciate their body. You can say, oh my gosh, I really love shoulders like that, glutes like that. Let's work towards having more of that. But the negative comparison is like, why am I not this person? And that becomes more of like an envious comparison versus just like a comparison of like, I don't like where I'm at. I see this. I want to work towards that. I think that's not bad. I think that it can just get really detrimental when it's like, I don't really know the right word, but I guess an envious comparison, and that might still not be the right word, but
I mean, I feel like a world without comparison, like we would all just be super average and like,
and nothing would be cool.
Who wants that? Like, what would our world be if we were all like literally just the same and just average? Like,
you can't just be, nobody can just be satisfied with everything. Like you have to be satisfied with certain things in your life. But you also have to want to strive towards those. And the only way you can do that is if you see or hear about other people doing it. But it has to be from that like intrinsic place. And
I think, I mean, using it as motivation, but not like the detrimental thing, like you were talking about, like, you know, this person has that, and, you know, like, why do they get to be this? And and then it's kind of like the other side of the coin is like, well, you know, I'll never be that. Like some of us don't work from home. So like, of course it's way easier for you. And it's like, I'm here to tell you right now, I've worked in a ton of different environments where shit was crazy, especially when I was training for shows. Like I worked 4 jobs and I was getting my master's and I was training in 2017, and I did 4 shows that year, and I did great. Granted, that was the only year that I really did great, but but still, like I never missed a beat. Like I did not miss that year, like at all. And I just didn't make it excuses for myself. So, I mean, I think that there's the detrimental, like idolizing someone where you're like, oh, I just want to be them. And like, why can't I just be like them? But then there's also like, well, they have all this and I don't. So like, why even try? You know,
it goes back to kind of what you're saying with like the victim mentality. Like, it's okay, maybe they have things that you don't have and that you'll never have. And they've had those things for a long time and they might have them for their whole life. But that's also not going to help you get anywhere. And it's certainly not going to help you get any closer to where they are. Especially when we're like, there's just certain things that are just never going to change, you know, like I can want curly hair all I want. I can be, oh my gosh, I wish I had
the waiver, duh.
Bro, I got it. I haven't used it yet. But it's been hot here. So I have a feeling that it is not going to stay because we did it when I was in Korea. I had this like, I'm going to say crimper and everybody's going to go, what? It's like beach wave, blah, blah, blah. Fucking, I don't know. But
I have one. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it was super cute. Like it was perfect for my hair. And it actually stayed because my hair does not stay.
Yeah.
And even same trip. So we were in Dallas for a week with like the coaches and then I was presenting, did my hair there, same weather, went to Austin, went to Dry Bar because it was like, we really need to work, but like also need to wash our hair. So we were like, let's just work while we get our hair done. And I told the guy, I just wanted like I just wanted him to like blow it out like that. I knew my hair was not going to stay. And he just heard curl your hair. And so he was like already started. So I was like, well, I'm not going to like tell him to stop now, you know? And he was just like, it was not staying. And I was like, it's okay. Like, no, like it's all good, dude. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
But I was like, how did like, and I know you're using good tools and good everything.
Yeah.
And then like $25 bedhead crimper works, but I don't know. I haven't used it here yet, but we will see. But anyways, the whole point is, okay, I'm never gonna have curly hair.
So many tangents.
This is just how we talk. This is my ADD. Jenna definitely looks at my behaviors.
I analyze Laurin all the time.
Oh yeah, because there's a lot to analyze.
There's a lot of behaviors. Yeah, you do a lot of things. So I mean, there's a lot.
That is true. Do a lot of things, have a lot of behaviors, have a lot of thoughts. There's always like 4 thoughts going on at once in my head. It's like, okay. But back to this thought, having something like that, like, okay, I'm never going to have curly hair. And that's a really stupid fucking example, but there are literally like things that we're kind of making light of that, but there are certain things that somebody's going to have that you're never going to have. And accepting that is like, okay, like this is what it is. You know what I mean? What can I do? What can I do about this? Like, and that's going back to that kind of like empowering yourself through behavior change. Like, what can I change here? What can't I? And it's not enough to be like, well, this is who I am because, well, obviously with the curly hair thing, sure. But with like the behavior that I'm exhibiting, like I could say that. And we know plenty of people who are like that. This is just who I am. Like, okay, well, maybe to some degree, like I definitely believe that everybody has a certain personality and we're always going to kind of skew one way or the other. Like I'm never going to be like fucking super mellow. I don't think, and I don't think I need to be.
No,
right? That's probably
not unless you start dieting again.
Yeah, then I'm just like, hey guys. But like, and I also don't need to be because it's just not who I am. But do I also need to be like the most like wound up psychotic version of myself? Probably not. And there are certain behaviors that will inch me towards that. And I can say, no, okay, maybe I'm somebody who like has this proclivity to get like riled up and really anxious and do this. So why don't I create some behaviors that allow me to manage that and not just be like, well, this is who I am as a person. I'm never going to be a totally different person, but I can be that better version of me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I would say that, 2 things. I would say that obviously, like I would 100% say that it's okay for someone to say, well, this is who I am and what I believe, if it's not hurting anybody and you're not hurting yourself. But if somebody just doesn't like that about you, you're not for everybody. And that's okay. I'm not for everybody, and not everybody is for me. And that is just okay.
That is the most Jenna thing I've ever heard.
And that took a long time to like, grasp, because growing up, I was very much like, I want to please everyone. I want to be everybody's favorite. If people don't like me, like I hate that. Now, like, I mean, it's not that I want people to hate me, but I'm just like, if you don't like me, like I know, like I know I'm a good person. Like I want the best for people. I'm a good person. I have a good heart. And if you don't like me, like that's okay. We don't have to be like besties. Like it's okay. So like,
you're confident in who you are as a person. Like you said, you're not hurting anybody. And this is very different than having like toxic behaviors and being like, just deal with me. That's like not appropriate.
Yeah. Like whatever, like, and just not having any regard for like other people's feelings. And, there's a lot of people out there like that, which is really unfortunate, but
I think that idea, unfortunately, has gotten hijacked by that group of people, right? Because it's like, are you a people pleaser? Just fuck everybody. Like, who cares? Well, not that way, but you know what I mean? Just go bang everybody that you see. No, you know what I mean? Like, there's like the opposite of it is like, if you're a people pleaser, it's like, who cares? Don't change any of these behavior. Don't like, it's like, no, we don't need to balance between these extremes. We need to be like, okay, are my behaviors working for me, serving me and others? Am I a good person? But at the end of the day, also being confident in your personality and your skills and just who you are, and being like, all right, like you said, not for everybody.
Yeah.
That's okay. So
yeah. And that's kind of with the social approval thing. But one thing that you did say, like you said that you're ADD, which I have not a clue because I can't actually diagnose you with that. But I mean, for people who, and I hate to say like people who like just use the term ADD.
I know I should not say it.
Because there are actually, people who have ADD and ADHD and other, neurotypical or neurodiversity types of things that, they really are affected by them. I would definitely say that you are somebody who thrives on structure.
Yeah.
And that would be a very characteristic of somebody who is neurodivergent. So like, structure, antecedent interventions, having a plan, setting things up for your success, making sure the environment is right, having everything as best as you can to make sure that you're going in the direction that you want to go. And I think that, a lot of people, I'm kind of like a whatever, person. I'm very laid back. So, if something gets messed up in my schedule, I'm not freaking out, but not everybody is like that. And so making sure that, like you're setting up that schedule and scheduling things, making sure that everything's in the right place as much as possible. You can't control everything. And again, it's kind of one of those things that when your schedule or something gets interrupted or it gets messed up, you have to practice those things. Mm-hmm. So having days where you don't schedule anything or you schedule less and you just have to, figure out what to do with quote unquote free time, or figure out what to do when you don't have like this written plan in front of you. And people really, really, really struggle with that when they're used to it. I know people who like, they work Monday through Friday, like super regimented. And then Saturday through Sunday, they're like, oh my God, I don't have this plan. I don't have structure. Like, and they just, they can't function. So super important if you're one of those people to still schedule things, but like work on being less rigid.
Yes, I've definitely gotten so much better with that. I would say that I am much more flexible than I ever used to be. And I think because I also realized that like I tap in well to having some chaos sprinkled in, you know what I mean? Like I like my order, I like my structure, but I also like to be able to have those other things in there, right? And actually having those in there allows me to concentrate better. Because if it's just like, hey, here's this work block with nothing like on end, I almost like set myself up for failure, because then I'm just like bing, 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 bing. Like if I say, hey, I got an hour and a half to do this, okay, then I'm going to go do this for this amount of time, and I'm going to go, like, I actually do better when I'm like moving and doing stuff. And actually, I think the biggest thing that has helped me become less neurotic is traveling, because if you travel a lot, shit's always going wrong. like
there's a lot.
There are so many moving parts, and like you are just one person in that sea of chaos. And I've gotten way, way more adaptable, I think, over time because of that. And not just the travel itself, but being around so many different people. And like, it is so interesting. Like you're forced to engage, and not like I'm bad at engaging with people, but like you are forced to engage in a lot of situations that, like, if you don't know how to like communicate or adapt, like it's not going to be a good time, and you're always going to be upset. Like now I'm like anything that comes up, I'm just like, okay, like, you know what I mean? Like, do I still get upset time to time? Like, of course, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's like, I am not going to waste energy on that. Like, what's the next move? What's like, what do I got to do here? Like, do I got to go? It is just so much better. But yeah, I probably shouldn't say that, because I actually have never been formally diagnosed. I mean, I've probably, easily could be diagnosed with, I'm sure, ADD, but I have not gone, and nor does it really matter to me. You know what I mean? If I have an official diagnosis or not, like, I have a lot of thoughts all the time at once. I'm always trying to do different things. Like, that's enough. Like, I think for me, it's like, I've just gone through enough exploration and like self-reflection to know, okay, like, what do I need? Because what I've needed before is very different than I need now, as like a person who's, you know, at a different age, a different place in my life, and also like at a different place in my business, you know, like, things are just very different. So I had to really reflect, like, what the fuck do I need? Like, what is going to make me optimal? Like, what behaviors do I need to add? What do I need to subtract in order for me to function optimally? Because what used to work was no longer. And I think a lot of people, especially, probably have that really rough transition if they've been in school for a long time. Because I mean, for me, you know, I was in college for 6 years, and then it was kind of like, okay, you know, like, you have so much structure with school, even when even when grad school has a lot more flexibility, obviously, than undergrad, there's still a lot of structure. Like, okay, I have classes these days, I got these projects, I got to do this, I got to work in between here. Like, it's all just kind of, and then once you realize that it's not like that, you know, like, oh, okay, well, now this is very different. And it's not just work stuff, it's like other life stuff too that you have to, you know, kind of adjust to. So I think that, just as a brief recap, as far as like behaviors go, I think probably one of the most important things would just be really sitting down and like sitting with yourself and saying, okay, what are some of like the behaviors that I probably need to change? Like, what do I need to add more of? What do I need to take away? And then possibly just like breaking those down. And if you are working with a coach, that's what you guys can do. And okay, like, let's focus on this one thing. And then we can
one behavior at a time. And I think, you know, something that we didn't really touch on that kind of just popped into my head, because you were talking about like working for certain periods of time and then doing something else, and then, you know, working and doing something else. I think, you know, we would call, so the term I'm kind of thinking of is like shaping. So, you know, what we would want to do is like, you know, say if your behavior that you're wanting to change is being able to focus like during work, and like work for like a period of time, like, I got to get this done. But, you know, you're just like constantly like, you only work for 5 minutes, and then you have to, you know, maybe you set a goal to work for 7 minutes. And then, you know, after 7 minutes, you take a break, you know, whatever. And then maybe next week you're going to work for 9 minutes. Next week, you're going to work for 11 minutes. And you kind of just shape that up into the behavior that you're wanting. And I mean, obviously you can apply that to tons of different behaviors, but that was just kind of the example that kind of popped into my head.
No, for sure. And I think that being realistic,
it's kind of that thing with like, that goes into like the big goal. Like, people just want to go straight to the big thing. And it's like, you gotta start with the small things. You know, extremes are not going to get you where you want to be for the long haul. Like, yeah, maybe for a little bit, but for the most part, you're going to be right back at square one because you tried to bite off more than you could chew, so to speak.
And there's always a rebound. The harder you push one way, the harder it's going to come back the other way.
Yep.
And that goes, we talk about this a lot, obviously, on the podcast, about whether it's like, nutrition or training or whatever it might be, like it's going to come back. So the same thing is true for behaviors. Like you're going to push all of these new things, you're probably going to go back to square one, and maybe even the other way, like, maybe even like in a negative direction. And we just see that trend with like everything in life. Right. So it's really hard because what is extreme to one person is going to be different across everybody. So it's really about knowing yourself. And that's where, working with a coach, working with a therapist, working with a behavior analyst, like understanding those things. If you maybe are like, I've tried everything, I can't figure out what to do. Maybe it is time to enlist the help of somebody else who is detached from you emotionally, because like as emotionally invested as I am in my clients, I'm not them, I'm not in their bodies. Like they're the most emotionally invested person in themselves for obvious reasons. So I can see things a lot easier. Same way you can see things a lot easier for your clients. Like, okay, yeah, that seems pretty obvious. Like on the outside looking in. So, don't be afraid to sit with that, figure out what you really need to tackle, both, positive additions and, removals in your life. And then, potentially work with someone through that.
Yeah. And I think that, that's where working with a coach is so important, because it's like, if I am, someone who's never had a coach before, and I'm like, this is what I want, they're just the direction from yourself, like thinking like, okay, this is what I want. This is what I have to do. And you're trying to change all of these things, when a coach can just be like, hey, this is the behavior that you're wanting, but like, let's start with this little thing right here and let's work towards that. And I mean, obviously you talk about that a lot, but it still gets lost on people, because the instant satisfaction of like having this thing that you want, and you want it right now. And like, I get it. I want immediate things also, so, I mean, I get it, but it's just having that coach to kind of like be like, okay, I get it. I know you want to get there, but like, let's start here and then let's work to get there.
Yeah. And the reason that we push that so hard is because it's going to take more time on the front end, but it's going to save you a lot of time on the back end. And that's the piece that a lot of people don't recognize. All they hear is, oh, there's all this work up front. And it's like, yeah, but this work that we do for a year could literally take you through the rest of your life. And that's what is more important than another 8-week or 12-week plan that is going to push you back another 6 months or a year. Like
8-week challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. And
which, I mean, not all of those, like if you want to like do an 8-week challenge, like cool, but like there needs to be some sort of plan for afterwards, because
and I was talking to today, I'm like, today's felt like a time warp, but I think it was earlier on a podcast, somebody from like, what year is it? So somebody was talking about that, and I was like, listen, I think there is a validity for 8-week challenges, especially when somebody's first starting and they don't really know a lot, right? Like that could be a really great starting place for them. It's something that is removing maybe a lot of easy, like low hanging things for them that like should just maybe take out. And that makes it a lot easier for them instead of adding all these positive behaviors. But do that a few times and then you can get a little bit more nuanced. You know what I mean? Like that's when, after a period of time where you're like, all right, maybe now I've removed some of the negatives from my life, I'm kind of in this good space, but now I want to add some more positive things. That's where it needs to get a little bit more nuanced. And of course, not to say that a coach isn't going to help you remove negative behaviors, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's just take away some of that low hanging fruit, give you a good starting place. Like there's nothing wrong with those challenges, so to speak, but okay, for the long-term plan, what else are we going to be doing? Because what we don't want is people just getting off and on an 8-week plan. That's what you don't, because that becomes that rat race of legitimately that is yo-yo dieting. Get on for 8 weeks, be off for a few, get back on, be off. And then eventually you look up in a few years and you're in a worse spot. So that is not advantageous. So use that to kickstart things if you want, not necessary either, but potentially could work. But yeah, outside of that, it's, and having those short goals, the reason that they work is because you talked about, people need shorter more consistent reinforcements, especially early on. So it can be really nice when you have a short timeline instead of saying, in a few years we'll be in a good spot. Like people are like, fuck you. So,
kidding.
Setting up those smaller, reinforcement schedules is definitely going to be useful, but also keeping the big picture in mind as well. So anything else to add? I feel like that we covered a lot of really good stuff in a lot of different ways.
I think that really sets apart like good coaching from bad coaching. Like a lot of people are like, what should I look for in a coach? And like, that's it. Like the everything that we just talked about, like the actual, like, I know you want to get here, but like, here's the steps that we're going to take to get there. And like, I understand that you want this thing, but like there's these small behaviors and habits that we have to create in order to get you there. And so, I mean, that's really what sets good coaching apart from just like the dude on the internet that's like, hey bro, like I can get you on stage in 6 weeks, like, and I mean, those people thankfully are dwindling. I think, I mean, I don't know, they're still out there for sure, but,
I feel like they're dwindling, but it also could just be the people that we know.
Yeah. Maybe.
Right. I never really know, but I'm going to try to be positive for once and say that it's getting better. So
yeah, I'd like to think that lots of people are, waking up on that front, but,
yes, definitely.
Still, it seems super enticing when some guy's like, I made this chick look like this. Yeah. Or, like some chick is like, hey, look at my journey. And it took me 6 weeks. And it's like, did it really though?
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. Anywhere that like, I know you don't really post a ton on Instagram, so probably don't even want to share that. Is there any resources that you want to share that like for like behavior change, like I could add to the show notes people could find? Like, is there anything good? Like a behaviorchange.org? I don't know. That's we should take that. That'd be great.
Behaviorchange.org. I'm sure it's taken by somebody. After
like that'll be
I'm gonna go ahead and go to that site and hopefully it's nothing pornographic. I doubt it, but I'm gonna go see.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I don't really have any websites for people. I guess I should have come up with some resources, but
you wanted to send.
I have an article. I mean, it is super long and people could totally read it if they want.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
we'll put that in the show notes.
The article is called Behavior Analysis Program to Improve Habits of Physical Activity, Eating and Sleeping. And it was done at Western Michigan University in 2015. And it was a super long article, but it gives so much good information on the other types of research that's out there. Nice. And like operational definitions of like the actual behaviors that they were trying to change, the actual like intervention that they had set up. And then they also talk about like what the most common reinforcers were for people. Nice. And I mean, spoiler alert, the fear of loss of social approval was like the biggest reinforcer. So, it's a great article, but it is super long, just warning you. So if nothing else, maybe just read the like, discussion.
Don't say, just read the abstract. Fuck that.
Don't read the abstract. Don't read the abstract. That will give you nothing, but, it is, a super long article. So maybe just break it up.
What's long?
It is, let's see.
I'm like, I want to read this, but
it's with, appendices and everything. It's 200 pages.
Oh, okay. Well, like that's like all the references and stuff, but
yeah.
But obviously it's a review, I'm assuming. No, it's not a review. That sounded like
but they include like previous research that's been done. Things
that's my favorite thing about like good papers is that you can usually find a few other citations like I just love that about a good paper, but maybe that's just the nerd in me showing.
And you can find this one for free. You don't have to have some sort of subscription, all that stuff. I don't think anyways.
Oh, such a racket. But yeah, well, so we will link that in the show notes. So if you like this week's episode, please share it. This is the best way you can support our show. To check out our coaching services, courses we offer, and additional content we put out, visit teamlocofit.com and follow us on Instagram at teamlocofit. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Bye.